On your second time around, the 193, what was the last country that you chose for yourself then?
It was Equatorial Guinea again.
No way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that
That's
again was
funny.
not entirely deliberate, but I ended up with Equatorial Guinea in the final five, and then I decided, oh, to hell with it. I'm going to have it be the last one once again. Yeah, yeah. So I did that.
That's
This
funny.
was in June. It was just a few months ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is quite funny. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Winging It Travel podcast with me, James Hammond. Every Monday, I'll be joined by guests to talk about their travel stories, travel tips, backpacking advice, and so much more. Right now, I'm taking the podcast on the road travelling with me. So tune in every week for short form episodes detailing all my travels alongside my Monday guest episode. Are you a backpacker, gap year student, or simply someone who loves to travel? Then this is the podcast for you, designed to inspire you to travel. There'll be stories to tell, tips to share, and experiences to inspire. Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm joined by Harry Mitsidis, who has travelled to every country in the world twice. Harry runs the NomadMania platform, which tracks travellers around the world and all the places that they go to, and he's on a mission to travel as far and as wide as possible. Many questions today and some questions about some countries that Harry's travelled to. So Harry, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm fine. Many greetings from South Korea, where it's currently really freezing. So, it's nice to be in a cozy room right now. Yeah.
Which part of South Korea are you right now?
Today I'm in a town called Wonju. It's kind of slam bang in the center. I did get to see North Korea today. I went to the Eastern DMZ, and you get a nice view across the border. I did see the North Korean flag, but anyway, I'm just driving around and enjoying South Korea, which is not really the most touristy or explored country. So it's quite interesting doing that.
Yeah, when I was there this year, it seemed to me, I don't know if this is true, that you can't actually go to the DMZ on the North Korean, the border, right? Is it closed still because of COVID is the rule or?
Well, the DMZ is a whole zone, so it
Yeah,
spans the whole border. Where you can't go, if I understood, is the actual area which is the closest to Seoul. That's where everyone
yeah.
goes, the kind of famous huts, which is split. I think you can't go there, but I went to the eastern part, which
Mm,
is on the east coast,
yeah.
and that area. I mean, you don't actually go to the borderline to the line, but you have a good view of it from a kind of observation deck, maybe 300 or 400 meters away. So it's quite interesting, and you get the full experience. You need to get a permit. You kind of drive through. There's a museum. Yeah, you definitely get a bit of a vibe of being in a in the no man's land. So that's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's next time I go, it's worth it. I love South Korea though. I thought it was great. Seoul is a great hub for. I love coffee, so I was quite surprised at how good it was there. But then you got like Busan in the south, two very well known cities, but very contrasting. And I couldn't believe there's like beach lifestyle down the south. This is in the summer as well, so it's very hot.
Yeah, yeah. Busan is fantastic. That beach there, that urban beach, I think it's totally iconic. It's up
Yeah.
there in my top five city beaches. So yeah,
Oh
yeah.
wow. Okay.
Seoul is definitely cosmopolitan. But there's a lot of other things in Korea. It's a country that begs to be explored, and it's got a lot of natural beauty, a lot of nice walks and treks, and hidden temples in the middle of the woods. It's really nice, and even now in the winter, it's beautiful. It just gets really cold sometimes, so you can't do too much outside.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It was actually super hot when we were there. Like the opposite. It
Ah,
was
right.
it was blisteringly hot. But yeah, loved it, and I would love to go back. So for this episode, I'd like to go back to the start for you, Harry. I'd like to know, where did you grow up, and was there an early memory that maybe kicked off the wanderlust, or at least an interest in travel?
Well, I grew up in Athens, in Greece. I was born in London. My parents are from different countries. So my mum's South African and my dad's Greek. I think there isn't an early memory specifically, but we used to always fly to London to visit my grandparents,
Mhm.
twice or even three times a year. So that was something I learned, I remember ever since I know myself. And I think this exposure to two cultures and airports, and I always liked the process of flying. I think that kind of got me going from a very, very young age.
Okay, and then going into like adolescence, when you start to realize, things of the world are happening. Did you have a one trip maybe by yourself, or like a proper trip that you can remember where you thought, oh wow, I actually quite like the whole thing, different culture, doing some activities. Was there one trip maybe you can think of then?
Well, I had many trips. I was lucky enough to have parents who liked traveling, and back then in the early to mid 80s, travel was really not as common as it is now.
Mm.
We did have a trip to South Africa. My mother left Cape Town when she was 16, and she hadn't been back until, well, her late 30s, that would have been. So it was more than 20 years that she'd been away, and we went down there. And for me, a trip to Africa at the age of 10 was really like, wow, we're with me. And I remember going to Kruger Park. Of course, it was a very, very different country then, but I was too young to understand
Mm.
anything about apartheid or, I mean, when you're 10, you don't realize these things. And I loved it. I loved the different food, biltong. I was like, what is this? Uh, little things like that really, really made an impression. It really was a different world. I'm not sure that's the trip that resulted in me becoming a traveler, but it definitely made an impact. Yeah.
Yeah, how did you sort of deal with the different cultures? Because your parents obviously are from different countries. Yeah, quite different countries, South Africa, Greece, and then you go into London as well. Like, how did you deal with those three different cultures? Did you speak each language? Are you multi or bilingual, or how was that working?
I am fully bilingual. We always spoke English at home because, well, my mum did learn Greek, but not particularly well. And somehow we always spoke English. And it was odd. I think I never really dealt with it. I'm still trying to find my place in the world and failing, which is why I keep on traveling. It is a bit difficult to have all these stimuli when you're very young. I think you never really feel you belong anywhere. For me, having my schooling in Greek and then coming home and speaking English, that was at the time rather jarring, I guess. I never thought about it. I always knew that I'm a little bit different from the other people at school, for example. And I don't think I dealt with it really. It was just there.
So, did you feel more comfortable in Greece or UK or South Africa? Like, or is it just equally just a bit strange?
Well, when you're a child, I'm not sure you process things as you do when you're an adult. I
Mm,
think at the time I was pretty Greek
mhm.
because that's what it took in order to be part of the peer group at school. You've got to kind of fit in, and that's what you want when you're a teenager more than anything else, right? So I think back then I was more Greek than anything else. But then afterwards, that's when things changed. And now I definitely don't feel Greek anymore, but I don't
Mm,
feel English either. And the South African part was never very important for me. I've only been to South Africa maybe three times,
mm.
considering my mum was born there. That's not a lot. So I don't see myself as South African in any way. But I do find certain things in England that are very familiar, and I definitely think in English. That's my first language.
Mhm.
And if I'm traveling abroad, especially maybe in some of the ex-colonies, and then I see something very British, I get this kind of a kind of feeling of odd belonging in a bizarre setting. So I definitely do feel partially English, but not entirely.
It's very interesting. I think it's the underrated. I don't know what the word is really, but when people grow up with different parents and different countries from Norwich, some from Norwich, right? So people don't travel here; they stay in Norwich, and that's it. So everyone is from Norwich, right? Including my friends and all the families here and stuff like that. but it's underrated because I've got some friends who have married like a Kiwi, for example. So they're from UK and from New Zealand. I know culturally quite similar, but other sides of the world. So how do you deal with that dynamic? Because they've got to choose one day, right? So either somewhere in the
Mm.
middle of both, or they've got to go to one of each other's country, and which means that the other person won't see their family as much, etc. But I think that is quite an underrated part of the growing up process if you have that in your childhood.
Well, I definitely see it as an advantage
Yeah,
because you're
and that. Yeah.
exposed to double, you end up knowing more and being aware of more. And also inevitably you become more adaptable because you've
Mm.
got to. So these things are always positive, I think, in the end, apart from perhaps this eternal questioning of where exactly do you belong. I suppose people who clearly are from one country don't question that so much.
Yeah, that's a big question in the travel community, right? Where do you actually belong? Because I
Yeah.
should really say Norwich, but do I really think I'm part of Norwich? I'm not sure. I haven't been here for 10 years, really. So
Oh, well.
it's a question I ask every day. I try to think about it. But you did study in Oxford as well, in UK.
I did. I did my postgrad there. And that was really my first true exposure to being abroad, to living abroad. It was possibly the best year of my life. Just being with people from so many different countries. And that was a turning point because I think there I really felt I do belong. I belong in this totally international setting with people from everywhere. That clicked with me.
Okay, so then when did the idea to travel, I don't want to say full time, but like extensively, when did that come into your mind?
I think it happened gradually. So I was always very curious about the world. I've always wanted to explore, and thanks to having parents who like to travel as well, I was exposed to quite a lot at a reasonably young age. Not too much, I've
Mm,
calculated that, I probably didn't have more than 40 countries by the age of 25, which might seem like a lot to some people, but given our community, that's not really that many. But I think gradually I thought, I can do this. And I'm an only child and I've learned to be alone. So I
hmm.
wasn't scared to go off on my own and explore in a bizarre country. That was totally natural. So I think it was mostly in my late 20s that I got this idea that I'm going to go to every country in Europe, which seemed very reasonable because I'd
Yeah.
already been to maybe 70%, and there weren't that many others, and they're not that difficult. So I did it. And the problem is that once you start with goals like that, then Europe isn't enough. So they immediately, for the following step is, well, now that I've done Europe, why not the whole world? And I think I was about 30. Well, I finished Europe when I was 29 with Belarus. And then I'm not sure I consciously started doing every country in the world. It didn't happen immediately. But then I think when I went to Afghanistan, which I'd always wanted to visit, then the penny dropped. And I'm like, well, if I've managed to do Afghanistan, surely I can do everything else. Uh, and that's how it happened.
I was then going to say, once you do like a hard country in brackets, right, where it's obviously difficult with visas or you have to do a tour, whatever it is, once you conquer that early doors, do you, as you just said there, do you think that really opens up the doors to anywhere else because the fear or maybe the worry is not quite there as much?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, in the case of Afghanistan, I mean, it was really bonkers. I went really in the early days without anything arranged. I just landed in Kabul, got out of the airport, looked around and thought, well, now what? And that now, I wouldn't do that now, but back then it seemed totally okay to do that. And I think once I had that experience and everything fell into place very nicely on that trip in Afghanistan. I had a wonderful time, met really nice people, really explored Kabul itself. So everything went fine. And I think you conquer your fears if you dive very deep early on, then there's nothing much to fear anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, another question actually about growing up as well. One more. I want to speak to Dave Seminara because I interviewed him on this podcast about his book, Mad Travelers. He had a chapter in there about people who don't like travel, which is quite interesting. There's like asking myself some serious questions in that chapter. But one of the most interesting things is that people who travel a lot when they're younger tend to not like it a lot when they're older, maybe because they've done it too much. So from the sounds of it, you've got just the right balance, because I can see why people who are constantly moving houses or homes, growing up because of their parents' jobs or whatever, that could get a bit tiresome.
Maybe, yeah. I don't really have an opinion on that, and I'm not sure you can classify people. I think at the end of the day, everyone is very different. I do know some people of my age who started off young and never stopped. And then there's a few
Mm.
travel legends I know. People like Heinz Stücker, who went all
Hmm.
around the world on a bicycle. He never stopped. I mean, he was away for 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, he really loved to travel, obviously. So I can understand that maybe people who do it early on, especially now, you've got a category of people who travel for social media purposes,
Mm.
or, maybe their aim is not travel itself, but, they use travel as a means to another end. Then at one point, obviously, it can tire you out. That makes sense. In my case, I do feel I started later. I already knew more or less what I do and what I don't like. And I had always been a very good student. I went through my student years pretty focused on my studies. I wasn't
Mm.
going left and right too much. So I think the kind of madness or quirkiness of travel set in when I was already older, and I have never tired of it. And I don't think I ever will at this stage.
Yeah, and I think I'm the same as you, maybe for a slightly different reason, is that travel when I was younger, because very working class background, just seemed completely unattainable. Like
Mm,
when you're growing up and it's pretty tough and single parent, all that, blah blah blah. When you've got no money, like the last thing on your mind is going on holiday. You need to get food on the table first,
yeah.
and then work your way up, right? So I think when I got to pretty early mid-20s, maybe the same as you, I feel I'm a bit of a late starter, and I thought, oh wow, this is actually attainable myself. I can maybe work some jobs, get some money, and do it. And that's why I would never tire. So it's quite interesting, these different dynamics, I think.
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting question, though. It would be nice to track people and see who does and who doesn't quit traveling in a way and see why. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. One I've explored loosely this year, just by asking some certain people on the podcast. But yeah, I'm keen by people's sort of travels into travel. Like, how did they get there? Why they're not doing it now? Why they're carrying on? All these questions are quite interesting, and it's a very niche because everyone's different, I think.
Yeah. Well, from my experience, I mean, in the NomadMania community, we've got people of many different backgrounds, ages. It's a really mixed bag. But I think when people do stop traveling or they don't travel that much, it's usually because of family or health reasons, one of the two. I've
Yeah.
never come across someone who traveled a lot and then stopped because they were like, I'm bored of it. But sometimes they have a partner who doesn't like to travel that much, and then maybe, it's not that they stop totally, but maybe instead of traveling for 6 months a year, maybe they only travel for 2 months a year. So
Mm.
something like that.
Do you think
Yeah.
this question is maybe fair as well, that you need a home base to travel long term, which might seem counterintuitive, but what I've learned this year from leaving my job, I've been traveling for 1 year, and what I've learned is I just need, going forward, a home base where if I just want to say
Mm.
tomorrow I just need a break, I can go back to somewhere
Yeah.
that is mine, not just having to figure something out, Airbnb or a hostel. I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a
Well,
new development for me.
well, I'm similar to you in that I've been traveling now for 3 months non-stop,
Mm.
and you'll be surprised to know that this is almost a record for me. I
Oh wow.
always go back. I may travel a lot, but I like being grounded as well to a certain degree. I realize now, I'm toward the end of my trip, and I'm really, I'll be happy to go back to a familiar home rather than keep on traveling. Now, I know some other people, for example, who don't have a home base. They sold
Mm.
everything. They
Yeah.
live out of a backpack and they just do Airbnbs, all the time. That's their life. I kind of admire that, but that's definitely not me. I do need a home to go back to.
Yeah. So I've been living in a backpack essentially for a year, and I just need a home. So a bit like you, I think going forward,
Yeah.
before I entertain anything of a long term trip, there has to be a home that at least come back to, because I think
Yeah.
you can relax fully, can't you? It's your place. You can do what you want, and you can leave
Yeah.
stuff there,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So where's home base for you?
Believe it or not, it's Kent.
Oh, okay,
So,
right. Yeah,
yeah. Yes. So yeah, we're not that far away
yeah,
actually. Although Norwich is kind of far from everywhere, isn't it?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, the home is Kent. I think I'm there about 100 days a year, maybe 120, more or less. And then the rest of it, I'm either traveling. I do spend a bit of time in Greece because my parents are
Mm,
there, but that's more or less how I divide my year up.
lovely. Okay, and that kind of goes into, so when you decided that maybe travel is something you want to pursue going forward, was there a plan, or was it really like, hence the podcast name, winging it, where you might have a few ideas where to go to first after university, or maybe like an area, but then how did you plan ahead?
Well, again, as I said already, I did Europe, and I think after that is when I started planning more consciously in terms of areas. I think I divided the world into areas, and I tried to optimize countries that were similar or made sense to visit
Mm,
on one trip at the same time. I don't think when I started that I was really aiming for every country, but I remember I did one trip relatively early on to Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, and that was in 2001. I mean, again, those countries back then were
mm,
not visited like they are now. Definitely not. And then I did one trip to Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan just after September 11th. I had already booked it, and everyone was like, don't go to any of those countries. And I'm like, well, it's booked. I'm going. And it was with some trepidation because when you've got all the media bombarding you, it's difficult to say, well, I'm going to do my thing anyway. But that trip went great. And then, yeah, I had a long trip to the Caribbean where I ticked off all those small island nations. So it was very much sort of dividing the world into regions. I did work at the time. I was a lecturer in different universities, so
mm,
I had holiday time. When you teach, you do get some good holidays, so I could play around with that, and I tried to optimize. And then once I reached, I'd say 130 countries, that's when I really realized I can do them all. And I had left Africa. I had left a lot of countries in Africa last, which I don't recommend to anyone who seriously wants to do every country. It's better to do Africa early on. But for me, that's how it went. And then I took a year off work and I basically traveled all around Africa for a year.
mhm.
And that was it. I did them all.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. It's interesting you say that. I was going to ask, do you think is what is the strategic advice you'd give if someone's got an aim, right, to go to every country? Would you say there's like 100, I don't know, 40 or 50 easy countries? Would you prioritize the harder ones first? Like, how would you go about it?
I think the best thing is to mix and match. Also, psychologically, I mean, let's say you start with 10. You've been to 10 and then suddenly you want to do them all. I think if you put all the difficult ones together, you're going to be very tired.
Mm,
And the difficult ones also require time. Uh, Also, for example, if you go to a country where the visa is hard to get,
hmm.
it's a shame to rush through it just because there's so many other countries you want to
Yeah,
see. You want to take your time. So I would do a few difficult ones early on and then give myself a psychological boost by doing a few easy ones if you want to see the numbers grow. But I definitely leave a number of really easy ones for the end.
yeah.
I have a friend who's consciously doing every country and is trying to leave Italy as his last one, which
Oh,
I think is really smart choice. I told him, but how are you going to go to San Marino without going to Italy
yeah,
first?
yeah.
And we worked out that maybe he could get a helicopter from Croatia to San Marino, go to San Marino first, and then cross into Italy. We were kind of joking, but the idea is that I know also many people who've done every country and celebrated in an easy one at the end. A country like Malta, for example,
Mm,
where you have to want to go there to go. It's not on the way. So a couple of travelers ended in Malta. I know someone who ended in Ireland. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend leaving Africa to the end because the African countries are the hardest in terms of visas. And then you've also got things like malaria to deal with,
Yeah.
and some of them can be quite difficult anyway. I mean, Africa is not a homogeneous continent by any means. I think many of us who are not from there think, oh, Africa, but it's the countries can be extremely different, and some are very welcoming and some are not. And even neighbors can be, just like in Europe, neighbors
Yeah.
can be very different. So I think it's important for people to try out a bit of everything as they go along. And then hopefully by the time they're at 130 countries, they they already know the ins and outs, what they like and what they don't, and then they can make a plan to go ahead.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm reading a book at the minute called "It's a Continent." It's about Africa because I've not traveled to Africa at all. I've been to 70 countries, I think, but never been to Africa, which is a bit of a gripe on my own travels, really. But it's interesting because they go through every country and just tell you something about that you don't know about. And because you're
Mhm.
right, people see Africa as a continent, but so many countries in there and different niches involved that, yeah, obviously you have to travel there and see it for yourself. But reading something like this is a good start because it gives you an idea of the nuances between each country. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's good to read, but at the same time, I think you shouldn't read too much.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes there's a golden mean in terms of how much you want to know and how much you want to just experience for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just want to get an idea of the countries that you never even really heard of that much. So, but I've got some questions for some countries later in the episode. I was going to mention as well, very randomly, that you have an interest in aviation.
I
The
do.
reason
I
I mentioned
love
this because
planes.
I was going to join the RAF when I was younger. A choice between that or music, and at the time I chose music to go and study, which is I wouldn't say it's a regret, but not the best decision. But hey, yeah, aviation that kind of falls into travel, doesn't it? Because I love going on planes.
Yeah, I love planes. It doesn't matter how. I know nowadays it's even difficult to admit it because people will be like, "Well, what about the carbon footprint?"
Yes.
And then I
Yep.
look at them and I don't really know what to say. I mean, yeah, I get it, but I really like flying anyway. And I still get that thrill, especially when it's a big plane, wide body. It's still like a wow effect, no matter how many times I fly.
Yeah, I love it. The weirdest one I went to is in Greece, actually. I went between
Oh,
Carpathos Island to Kassos Island.
I haven't done that one.
7 minute flight. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Ah,
You can literally see the
have you
runway from when
done
you take off.
have you done the one in Scotland? What is it? West
Ah,
J. I
ah,
haven't done that one either.
no, it's on my list. Yeah, like secretly on my list. I don't want to say too much about aviation because, like you
Great.
say, people get emotional about it. But
Yeah.
there's one in Tonga as well. I think it's one of the shortest ones in the world. Between two
Maybe the
islands.
one from Tongatapu to Ewa Island. I
Yes,
think that's like 10 minutes.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
in there.
I did. Well, we started by talking about North Korea. Well, the second time I visited North Korea was on an aviation tour. So
Oh,
the
huh.
whole point of the trip was to go to North Korea and then fly sort of ancient Soviet aircraft that are no longer available anywhere else. It was hilarious. Every day we would just go to the airport and fly somewhere else in North Korea. The whole thing was nuts. And there was 150 people on this tour, believe it or not.
Wow.
It was
Oh, wow.
massive. Yes, it was really well organized. We had a wonderful time, and I met many people I'm still in touch with from all over the world. So sometimes what seems like a crazy idea is actually a wonderful adventure.
To finish this little subject, I think my favorite one was the Cook Islands, Rarotonga to the Atutaki. It's about a half an hour
Oh,
flight, 40 minutes maybe.
yeah.
So the views, if you've got a clear day, wowzers,
Uh,
like you cut that
Were there
clear blue
many
water.
atolls or anything?
Yeah, like a
Kind of, if
few,
you.
yeah, yeah, fly over, yeah. But my girlfriend hates flying, not hate, little planes, should we say, but I love it. I was getting in there, like you can barely fit in, and I'm quite a big chap, so
Yeah.
yeah, just like hunkering down. Oh, loved it. But yeah, anyway, that's
Great.
another podcast, I think. I want to go to a very interesting question that I asked Rick Gazarian on my podcast. What is a country?
Ah, okay, you're opening Pandora's box.
That's what he said, yeah. I know we've got the UN countries, we get it. But
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, my definition flexes itself according to need. Well, I do think that the concept of a country is definitely a place which controls its own affairs. I think that is a sort of sine qua non. You've got to have control over your territory and
Mm,
affairs. But I also think legitimacy and a certain amount of recognition are essential. And that is where things get very muddled because what is recognition? What is
mm,
legitimacy? And then, Taiwan, for example, I would consider a separate entity to China because it's been around for what 75 years and
mhm.
it definitely controls its own affairs. So I cannot say, well, just because Taiwan's not recognized by the UN, that it doesn't exist separately. It clearly does. But then, there's some other places where this becomes a bit thornier, difficult to explain. I think these two criteria are necessary. And then, of course, to a certain extent, a distinct people in terms of culture or traditions or language. But then again, you've got some countries where the people are very similar, but you've got two countries. So if you take Romania and Moldova, very
Mhm.
much of Moldova is actually very similar to Romania culturally. So, you've got those cases which muddle that as well. Yeah, I don't know. A country is whatever you want it to be. That's my answer. And then some people make up their own countries, don't they? And you've got
Yeah.
these micronations, and no one takes them seriously. Well, that's not true. Some people do. I know someone who's counting them as a legitimate entities to be visited. So he's off to places like Sealand and Slowjamistan and you
Oh
name
wow.
it. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, the list can be endless. So that is why when we look at things in NomadMania, and especially when we're looking at the list of people who've done every country, we like to take the clean 193 members of the United Nations
Yeah.
because that one is the clearest. You either are or you're not a full member of the UN, and there can't be a debate. Those are the nations, and that makes it clear. But the problem with that is that it discounts places like Taiwan,
Hmm.
Palestine,
Palestine. Yeah.
Kosovo, and these places do have a certain amount of legitimacy, control, and also in terms of time, they've existed for a while. It's not something new that's likely to be changed. So that's also something to consider, perhaps time.
Yeah, where it came onto my radar, I think, is when I was younger, before I really questioned that. I was like, oh, I was counting Wales, Scotland, England, they're different countries. Yeah, they're countries to travel to. And then someone said, but they're not UN countries. I'm like, they're part of one. I was like, oh yeah, so I had to revise my total a little bit, and it kind of got me down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they are countries in football, aren't they?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
even in sports, the definitions are varied. So, yeah, there you go. There isn't really an answer to that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you see different numbers on social media that you're like 197 or 195, 193. It's quite
Mm.
confusing, but who doesn't really matter, but it's just like different definitions, maybe confuse the non-traveler, if you like. Ah, but I thought it was 193.
Come back to me in a month because we're having a poll on Nomad Mania with that
Ah,
question. What number do you consider the most legitimate? And we're actually giving all these answers as possibilities. So let's see what the majority vote for, and there we have a conclusive,
ah.
end number. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We are going to come to the NomadMania later in the episode because I want to obviously ask some questions about it, and people might not know what that is. So it's very interesting. Taiwan's an interesting one, just very quickly because I did go there this year. I've got friends from both China and Taiwan, and they're like, "Oh, do I approach and say it's a country?" It's really hard to like even define it when you're speaking in casual terms. So that was a great country to visit. Country, I'm calling it a country. I'm like you, but it's a touchy subject, isn't it?
Well, it depends who you talk to. I
Yeah,
find that the people, I think the people are quite pragmatic.
yeah.
I think even the Chinese will probably admit that Taiwan is something different. They cannot legitimately say. I mean, they may claim it's part of China, but clearly it's operated quite differently for a long time. The Taiwanese will definitely insist that they're not China. It's a wonderful place. There's a lot of different things to see, and I recommend you go to an island called Kinmen, very little visited, and that's right off the Chinese coast.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's nowhere near Taiwan. It's actually, you can see China from it. You need
Oh,
to take a plane or a 10-hour ferry from the main island of Taiwan, and then
yeah.
it'll take you to Kinmen. And there's a lot of military history in Kinmen, but also because it's sort of a part of Fujian province, it's right there. So there's a lot of Fujian style buildings and some really pretty villages. So if you want something a little bit out of the ordinary, that's the place to head to.
Oh, wow. Never heard of it. Wow. Okay. That's on my list, ever-growing list. I've got a question from someone on social media who actually asked, why did you want to travel to every country in the world?
Curiosity.
That's my answer.
You, you know,
Curiosity.
you know the Olympic Games where all the countries come out one by one. Well, I wanted to have a mental image of each of these countries
Yeah.
on, to say, okay, I can remember doing this in the Cook Islands, and may not even be a country, but I think they do participate separately in the
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Olympics. So,
Yeah.
there you go. So yeah, I think that was kind of my way. When I finally got there and I watched the Olympics and I could do that, I was like, I've done it. Now I can really remember every place. But definitely it was curiosity more than anything else.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say curiosity because when I was younger, I used to watch Tom and Jerry. So a bit of an old school
Oh, yeah.
cartoon. And there's one episode when they go to Hawaii and got the Hawaiian music and you got the Palm Beach and it's so
Yeah.
unattainable, as I said earlier. It's like, what is that place actually like? And I used to like read maps and atlases and stuff like that. So I think I'm always searching for the next, like, oh, is that paradise? Is that paradise? I'm always interested in island nations, especially like in the South
Did,
Pacific or the Indian Ocean. Like, oh, what are those places like? So as well as the people, yeah.
what did you think of Hawaii?
I actually loved it. Like Lanakai Beach was awesome, but it wasn't quite as paradise as I probably imagined. Cook Islands was definitely that. Achitaki.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's closer. Yeah. Have you been to Tuvalu yet?
No, so I've actually got a South Pacific question actually later in the episode. That South Pacific area, which is huge, like how do I go to these places? Like, it's a logistical nightmare from my perspective. Maybe it's not, but these are little islands. I'd love to go to them, just like speak to the people and see what it's like. But I haven't been. No.
Yeah. Well, definitely that should be on your list more than
Okay.
any other.
Really? Okay. We'll add it on. What type of traveler are you? Are you like a bit of a backpacker? Are you sort of mid-budget? Are you a bit of a luxury traveler these days? How do you define, or has it changed over years, do you think?
It has definitely changed. So, well, first of all, I wouldn't pigeonhole myself ever, and especially not now. I
Mm,
like to be very versatile, and I think I still am. I can do anything, and I often do. So, uh, I would say I'm middle of the road in terms of budget overall. I can stay in some really economical places sometimes, and sometimes I may go for a really good hotel. I also like Airbnbs, and I have done couch surfing in the past, so definitely the whole range there. I wouldn't call myself a backpacker. I never have been, but I'm definitely an independent traveler. I prefer traveling solo most
mhm.
of the time. Lately, like in the past years, NomadMania has organized a few trips and got some small groups together, and I find I do enjoy that. But deep down, I'm definitely a lone wolf, and I find that when I'm alone, I can concentrate more on the place and on really understanding the people and observing. If I'm traveling with other people, sometimes I'm giving too much of my attention to them. Um,
Ah, mm,
Apart from that, yeah, and then again, in terms of how I travel, I think this has evolved as well. Now I'm finding that I'm a bit more of a slow traveler, spending more time in the same country. I've just spent a whole month in Japan. I think the earlier, younger Harry would never do that. I'd spend a few days and then cross the border, hop off to somewhere else. But now I like to take my time more, and I guess that's also getting older, you may not want to rush things, or you just don't have the stamina to rush things like you did when you were younger.
I'm the same. I think slow travel is the future. I think this year's been way too fast for me. I'm only mid-30s, but I think slow travel is the dream because you're under no constraint to get anywhere anytime to a degree.
Mm.
But that has its challenges, income and being able to take that much
Yeah,
time off and stuff like that.
yeah, obviously. I think one of the things about trying to do every country is that you end up inevitably rushing through a lot of them
Yeah.
just because you want to get the numbers up. And I realize now a bit the error of my ways. I mean, I did it too fast. And if I could go back, I think I would have spent more in each country and really taken the time. And I'm trying to do that as much as I can now.
Yeah, I think Drew Brinsky said that when he got to his last country. And then he's like, now he's traveling better because it's not a thing he has to achieve anymore. He
Mm,
can go to any country and take as
yeah,
long as he wants.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which is quite interesting because I think he's younger than me, so he's obviously done it quite fast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think again, people who do it when they're in their 20s or early 30s, and I finished them when I was 36. Back
Mm,
then, that was still the early days. I think I must have been perhaps about the 40th person who did every country. Now there's almost 300, or perhaps even more. Again, depends on how you count them. But again, I think I did it too young. So people who are older, they have more time, hopefully. And then at the other end, you've got some people who are in their late 70s and have not given up and still managed to
mm.
do every country. And I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the enthusiasm for that. That's great. Also, does that mean that if you complete early on, I know you said you rushed through the 193. Does that mean it gives you a bit more time to think about the obscure places, not countries, or they could be, depends how you define it, but I'm talking places like, I don't know, Beaver Island, for example, or Tristan da Cunha, like these obscure, faraway places. Now you've been to every country in brackets, like you can now concentrate on the harder ones that are not country specific, but are quite hard to get to.
Mhm.
Hey, yeah, just a quick one. I just want to say there are many ways to support this podcast. You can buy me a coffee and help support the podcast with $5, or you can go to my merch store with the affiliate link with TeePublic, where there's plenty of merch available to buy, such as t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies, and also some children's clothing. Thirdly, which is free, you can also rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or Good Pods. Also, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Simply just search for Winging It Travel Podcast, and you'll find me displaying all my social media content for traveling, podcast, and other stuff. Thank you.
Well, I mean, in my case, I founded NomadMania, and NomadMania divides the world into 1,301
Mm.
pieces. So, I mean, compare that to the countries, and you've got so much more to
Yeah.
do. So, I definitely have been kept occupied all these years with all these different regional divisions of places. And it does, I mean, obviously, once you've done 193, and then you have more time to enjoy perhaps the things that you really like, the interesting things. I really like villages, sort of
Hmm.
nice, pretty, cozy villages, or culturally interesting villages. So that's one of my interests. And some of these places are difficult to get to out of the way. So now I'm focusing partially on those. I also like bizarre sites, and luckily there's no end of those. So you've got, things like the world's biggest egg, or I don't know, Carnage, or whatever. I mean, there's loads of those, especially in the States, but everywhere. Here
Yeah.
in Korea, there's a place called Peanuts Park. I admit I didn't go. I didn't have the time yet, but it's like a park full of phallic symbols. So these quirky places are definitely amusing to visit, and we list them also on Nomad Mania for ease of
Okay.
reference. If you really like these, then there's there's like a list of 500 of them, and you can try ticking those off. Yeah.
Yeah, because across Canada we went to is it the biggest axe in the world? Like strange, quirky things. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I love that. Another question you mentioned, interestingly, So do you predominantly travel solo, do you say then, you think?
Mm.
And that's very interesting because a lot of people are fearful of that, aren't they?
I suppose so. But then again, as I said, I'm an only child, and that gives you some specific advantages in this regard. You kind of learn to be alone and to do things independently. So yeah, I'm definitely not afraid to go alone. I'm more fearful of going in a group because sometimes people talk a lot, and
Yeah.
I don't handle very well if someone is talking nonstop. Or then you might be with someone obnoxious in a group, and I try to be diplomatic and polite, like most Brits. But so when you're alone, there are no such risks. You know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I learned a lot this year about tour groups. I've done my first tour group travel this year. I thought, do you know what, I'll try it. I
Oh,
don't think I'll enjoy it, but let's go for it. So I done it in Lebanon, and I went with a Portuguese tour group. They're great. I think they're called 100
okay.
Rotas Viagem. Anyway, they were a lovely group. They tried to speak English to me. The tour guide who lives in Lebanon, he spoke English. He lived in Bournemouth for 10 years. So he spoke a bit of
Oh,
Arabic,
lovely.
but Portuguese English. So I got the full tour because he could explain stuff to me. But what I did struggle with is there's a constant uh, criteria every day. Right, we'll start this time, do this time, and then some days I just had to
Mm,
just take myself away, which I thought, oh, is that the right thing to do in a group tour? I'm not sure, but I just had to because
mm.
it's too much. It's not against anyone. It's just the whole dynamic of, like you say, someone's talking too much or it's too intense, it's too fast paced. I did struggle a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's always, pros and cons in that. Obviously, if you're traveling in a group, it's going to be cheaper, and you
Mm.
will have that piece of social interaction to make sure you don't feel lonely.
Mm.
And also, there's a safety net. In the more dangerous countries, I think it may be very wise to travel in a small group, especially if you've got a local expert as well.
Mm.
But but ultimately, the freedom of traveling on your own where you don't need to compromise at all. And, if you find yourself in a place you really enjoy, you can just say, well, I'm going to stay here for a couple of days because I
Yeah.
like it and I don't need to give an explanation to anyone. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's
Yeah.
always trade-offs in life.
But I think solo is a little bit unrivaled. I think you're right. I think it's the freedom. But not say it too loudly because I do travel with my girlfriend quite a lot. Okay. The last question you got to on your 193 was Equatorial Guinea. Now, was that planned or
Yes.
was it just the way it worked out?
Equatorial Guinea at the time was one of the hardest visas to get. It
Mm.
still is relatively hard, but back then it was near impossible. So, I mean, it wasn't planned as such. I had left a lot of Africa, and then gradually I went, to every other African country. And then I found myself left with Equatorial Guinea because I hadn't managed to get the visa. And yeah, it took me a while to find a way to get it. It was not easy at all. But once I figured it out, yeah, obviously I went and it was my last one. So I'd say it wasn't a deliberate choice. It was more a choice because of the difficulty of going.
And when you went, with the last country aside, was there anything about the country that surprised you or that you really liked that maybe you could tell people?
In Equatorial Guinea, well, let me tell you what happened there. So, in order to get the visa, I followed the strategy of make your problem everybody's problem. And the way I did that is literally everyone I met, I would be like, you don't by any chance know someone who has any connections to Equatorial Guinea. And I literally did that to everyone I knew. And in the end, the person who came through for me was my mother, who also
Ah,
started this strategy. And she asked everyone she knew, and a friend of hers was dating this gentleman who had a company which did business with Equatorial Guinea. And one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I had the visa, thanks to him. I got a nice business visa, bless him. And what happened is because there was a team of that company in Equatorial Guinea, they took care of me. It ended up being the easiest trip I had ever done because I flew straight from Spain to Equatorial Guinea, and then the people of the company were waiting for me at the airport to drive me to
mm,
the hotel. They didn't really know why I was there. So this boss who was my contact had told them, this guy is coming and you take care of him. And they told me that they thought I was coming to check on them, or that like
Oh,
there was some quality control involved. I mean, they didn't know. So they were being super attentive, and it was hilarious because of all the countries in Africa, Equatorial Guinea was the easiest in the end. And one of the surprises there was going into a Chinese thrift store and having the Chinese lady talk Spanish to me, which is the official language. I'll never forget gracias with a Chinese accent. That was just outlandish. Yeah.
I've got some countries here that I might ask a few questions because they're based on sort of personal ones. It's quite rare to speak to someone who's been to every place. So the first one is that I think more recognized now is Turkmenistan. Is it a group tour situation there, or can you go independently?
I've been twice, and both times I've been on my own, but with a guide. So pre-organizing my own trip.
Yeah.
I don't know what the situation is now. Everyone I know now who's going is going with a group or a fixer or pre-organizing it. The difficulty with Turkmenistan is the visa. They seem to be a little bit picky.
Yeah.
It's not always easy. Even when I went the second time, the agency I went with were quite hesitant. They were like, don't be upset if you're rejected, which I wasn't. But then some other people I know have been, and you never know why. But Turkmenistan itself is one of the quirkier countries around. It's definitely worth a visit. Definitely. It's unique.
And you went to the door to hell, I assume, on your tour there?
I did, yes.
Is that as grand as you see in the pictures?
Yes, it is. It's again, it's one of those iconic sites. If you're in Turkmenistan, you kind of have to go. That it would be silly not to. I don't know if it's that unmissable. I think perhaps because we've already seen all the photos, you know what to expect. So then the wow effect isn't really that big, but it's definitely worth going, and then it's a fun place. What I find interesting in Turkmenistan, well, in Ashgabat especially, it almost seems to be totally sucked out of any atmosphere. I have never been to a place which has little. It's like they took all the atmosphere and sucked it out, and the people. They're friendly and all, but it seems to me they're totally robotic. Even more so than North Korea.
Wow.
I'm not sure I can put it quite into words. You've got to be there to understand what I'm saying. But the rest of the country isn't like that. That would because the further out you go, the more the towns and the especially the countryside are closer to the Soviet past, because they haven't yet been erased. So you're going to get more sort of Soviet, which is more familiar in a way. It hasn't changed that.
Yeah, because that's the capital city, right? That you would inevitably land in.
Yeah, and it has all this unbelievable architecture.
Yeah,
a lot of which is really pleasant on the eye. I mean, a lot of the things there are truly impressive, and they will make you go, "Wow!" Very, very. Make sure you've got plenty of mobile phone memory, because you're going to need it with all the pictures you're going to be taking in Ashgabat. Yeah.
Interesting. I think the reason I put it on there is because when you think of countries, people that you might meet traveling elsewhere, I don't think I've ever met someone from Turkmenistan. So I'm like, the intrigue is high there.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. I haven't thought of that. I've never met anyone from Turkmenistan outside of Turkmenistan.
Yeah. Like I bet like an Uzbek or even a Tajikistan person, but like never Turkmenistan. Just a song there. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, well, it is definitely the outliers. So the other four stands are much more accessible. We don't need visas for them anymore. They're much easier to get in and out of, and I would say the people are much more open as well. In Turkmenistan, I think the people, in all fairness, that they're probably afraid.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their situation is, but they are not going to be very open with you. They'll do their job and that's it. In the other countries, they're much warmer.
Oh, okay. That's a good tip. Okay, next country. These are random. Central African Republic. So
I love it.
Okay, minimal knowledge here for me. So it's really stab in the dark. Maybe something surprising or interesting experience that you experienced there, maybe on your year in Africa.
Okay, well, Central African Republic is possibly one of the harder places to go to, one of the more dangerous. It's an odd place. It's really the center of Africa in more
Yeah.
ways than one. Well, what happened to the second time I went, I was in a group with another three travelers, and one of them was the the very famous, or should I say, infamous William Bakeland, who
Oh
I'm
wow.
sure you've
Okay.
read about
Yeah.
in the book by Dave Seminara. Anyway, so there were four of us, and we ended up being detained in a small town called Berberati because one of us inadvertently took the photograph of the bank, and the whole thing
Oh.
was just weird and bizarre. It's a bit of a scary country, Central African Republic. The site to definitely not miss is the ruins of the palace, the former palace of their emperor. So Central African Republic had an emperor as leader in the 60s and early 70s, and he was a total nutcase, apparently. And there are rumors that he was even a cannibal and ate some of his rivals. But the ruins of his palace are really worthwhile. They're about an hour out of the capital, and it is accessible. And he even has his initials on the gate. So I think his name was Bokassa. So there's a B, the gate sort of forms B's everywhere because that was his residence. That's probably the only real site in the country, with the exception of a waterfall. And if anyone is going there, I'd really recommend that you do that one with a guide or a group. The first time I went totally alone,
Oh wow.
and I didn't have any really negative experiences, but it was just. I kept on being harassed in the town. People wanted money everywhere. It's not a very pleasant country, let's put it that way. And it's been plagued by endless civil wars. And even now, I think a bit of it is under rebel administration. I don't know. No one really knows. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. A completely different part of the world then. Next country is Nauru.
Oh, one of my favorite.
Oh, is it? Oh wow. Okay, I did not know that. Maybe tell listeners where the hell that is in the sort of Pacific region, and why is it one of your favorites?
Okay, well, it's one of my favorites for all the wrong reasons. And I recently wrote my second book, which is a work of fiction. It's an Agatha Christie style murder mystery starring the travel community, different people in them. And anyway, I end up getting murdered in Nauru. I gave myself that gift. So. Yeah, why do I like Nauru? Well, it's first of all because it literally is in the middle of nowhere. This is a lone island. It's only 21 square kilometers. You can walk, and I did. You can walk around the whole country, the island. It took me 4 hours and 15 minutes to do that. So there is a sort of perimeter, and you can walk around. It is. I don't know how to explain its location. It's sort of 4 hours flight northeast of Brisbane and 3 hours flight northwest of Fiji, in the middle of the Pacific. It does have an airport. It does have an airline, which has one plane, I think. You can fly there, but it does require a visa, which already makes it a difficult country. It's the only country in the Pacific which requires a visa from most nationalities. And that visa is quite hard to get because there's no real embassy. You need to do it all online. They require a hotel reservation, but there aren't any hotels on Booking.com. So you need to kind of navigate through all this bureaucracy in order to get this visa. Then once you're there, you know that you are thousands of miles away from anywhere. You're probably one of the very few foreigners there. And there are things to see. The locals are quite friendly. What I particularly liked in Nauru, I was there just a few months ago. It was one of my last countries on my second round the world. I went to the local post office because I wanted to get some stamps. I thought Nauru's a good country to buy stamps from. And they had all these stamps of the British royal family. So the Queen Mother, Diana, all these, Nauru issued stamps from the 1980s or whenever. And I just thought, this is amazing, that they actually issued these stamps. You can rent a bicycle and also cycle around the whole country. There's not many countries where you can say you cycled around the whole country. But in Nauru, you really can do that. So I both walked around it and cycled around it, and I recommend it, but it is very hot. So you need to do that either early in the morning or very late in the day. And yeah, it is quirky. It used to be quite rich because they had phosphate reserves, but they depleted them all, and that's when their economy crashed. And they are more known now for a detention center, which has been agreed on with the Australian government, and that is very controversial. And so Nauru also has a bit of a darker side because of this detention center where all of these asylum seekers from Iran and Sri Lanka have been banished to. And it's certainly a quirky place. What happened to me when I was leaving the country, the immigration guy actually asked me, so what number country is Nauru for you? So I think, it was like, okay, he knows why I'm here.
Yeah.
I did. So yeah, obviously they know when they get lone visitors from random places who are not there on business, that they are probably counting country.
It's quite an unusual country because for the Pacific Islands, there's normally quite a lot, isn't there? There's like 20 or 30 or 100 islands for that one country, but Nauru is literally one island and that is it.
Yeah,
it's quite unique. And
that's it.
Is it classical, like, got the beaches, like the Pacific beaches and stuff like that there, or is it really not like that?
No, there are a couple of beaches. The thing is that because there's a sort of outer layer, so the waves crash and then they're sort of corals or whatever they are, which means it's not really that easy to swim. It's not like you've got a nice ocean where you can just plunge inside. There are some nice sandy areas, but I don't know, swimming there, it's very windy and wavy. I wouldn't. I'm not sure,
Okay. I didn't realize it had such a story. When you go through the 193, you think, oh, that's an unusual country to even read about.
It's very unusual. It's also, I think it's the country with the smallest population of all the 193. I think it's a couple of hundred smaller than Tuvalu in terms of population. Yeah.
Right. Okay. On your second time around, the 193, what was the last country that you chose for yourself then?
It was Equatorial Guinea again.
No way.
Yeah. Well, that again was not entirely deliberate, but I ended up with Equatorial Guinea in the final 5, and then I decided, oh, to hell with it, I'm going to have it be the last one once again. Yeah. So I did that. This was in June. It was just a few months ago.
Yeah. That is quite funny. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a patron shout out to Laura from the Swamp Soup Stickers, who's contributed £5 to the podcast on my Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate it, and it helps the podcast to keep going in the future. If you're interested, head to the show notes where you'll find a link to my Patreon. The website address is patreon.com/Winging It Travel Podcast. For £5 English, you will receive some trendy stickers from myself in the post, a shout out on each episode, and also my digital travel planner by email. Thank you for your support. Do you know Mike Spencer Bound? Travelled to every country in the world.
Yes, I do. I do know of him. We've never met,
Okay.
but I know of him, and I owe him my visit to Mogadishu. So I am very thankful
Oh,
to
okay.
he had
Interesting.
well, he went to Mogadishu in 2011, a few months before me, and at the time everyone used the Lonely Planet. What was it called? Thorn Tree or something. So, that was the way to find out about travel. And he had posted some very useful information, which I used to plan my trip to Mogadishu. So,
In his book, he just said he left Ireland last, which is quite a nice place to finish, isn't it?
yeah,
Nice and easy
definitely.
one. Yeah, I think he's still traveling. I think he's still in Europe, I think, somewhere.
Oh, yeah. He's
Yeah.
one of those who will always be traveling. 100%. Yeah.
A question I have here is, to say you've been to a country, is there specific requirements? This might come back to NomadMania as well, with how long you stay there, or if you spend money there. Is there specific rules with that?
Well, I'll give you the NomadMania rules, which were in fact something that we took very seriously, and ultimately we had a poll to determine these. So we came up with two polls, in fact, with many different scenarios of visits, and people could choose yes or no. It is or it isn't a visit. So according to NomadMania, sort of airports are definitely a no-no. You cannot claim you've been to a country, even if you've crossed immigration. So, getting a stamp, but just pottering about Heathrow, that's not going to do it. You've got to go beyond that. In general, just so that I don't make this too long, you've got to have a meaningful experience. Now, that in itself sounds a bit too vague. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be meaningful, and you don't even need to cross immigration. But you've got to have a meaningful experience within the country. Probably, I would say, rule of thumb: experience something major of that country, a major site. Whether it's natural or man-made, see something that matters. Just going and grabbing a beer, next to the airport might be meaningful if you end up interacting with the locals and having, then you can have a memory and you can say, okay, I met this guy and he told me this story. Well, then you have, in a way, experienced the country, and in terms of time, we don't really give a time frame because countries really vary. And I think it's not fair to say you've got to stay that long, because in a country like San Marino or Liechtenstein, and no offense to those small countries, but I think you can do pretty well with a few hours, and that's fine. But yeah, we require much more than just stepping out of a train station or crossing a country by car without doing anything. Yeah.
Me and my friends done a little week trip early this year, and the idea was the micronations in Europe. Can we go to each one without flying? Which we didn't actually achieve that well due to time. But the rule was to say we've been there was to stay a night. So it's hard.
Yes.
Back in city, you can't really stay a night in there, I don't think. So Rome was the qualification for that. We went there for a whole day. So I guess that ticks.
But is Vatican a country? It's not in the 193. So that again,
is it in 195?
It is in 195. Yes,
Yeah.
It's got the observer status. Right. Well, there is the Danish Travelers Club have that rule of a 24-hour stay. So they actually count 24 hours. It's not just an overnight, but they will say, if you enter at 11 a.m., you need to stay until the next day at 11 a.m. And that's what. But then again, I look at it from my own experience. So again, not deliberately, but I had been to Slovenia 15 times without ever sleeping there. Because I always entered Slovenia. I had many friends in Croatia, and we used to go for a day trip to different places in Slovenia. A couple of times I came in from Italy. So, 15 times I've been there. And can you really tell me I haven't visited Slovenia? Eventually I did end up spending a night there. But, I think that there might be all these different combinations. So it's a bit unwieldy to have too strict a criterion. But at the same time, in the past, people would transit Jeddah airport and say, I've been to Saudi Arabia. And because that was a notoriously difficult visa, people would try to get around it that way. And I'm like, no, you can't claim it. To me, that sounds silly.
That is silly. I think it's all subjective. That's the problem, right? When it's not clear, black and white, there's people are going to tell you that they had a meaningful experience here, having to be outside the airport. But for me, I'm like, well, that's not.
Yeah. Well, what surprises me a bit with the community is that some people like to fool themselves. I mean, I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, the only one you're fooling is yourself. Have you really? Can you really tell me what that country is about? So I think, as I grow older, I realize that all of these questions are a little bit silly, because if you like to travel, you should just end up spending as much time as possible in a place rather than trying to rush through it and get quick visits and quick ticks in ways that are not really meaningful.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Absolutely agree. I think that's partly our rule with the micronations in Europe, because that's so small. Even spending 2 nights there is quite a lot. In San Marino for 2 nights, I think we were there. I mean, you do see pretty much a lot, but like 2 nights in China is not a lot, right? So
I've never slept in San Marino. I've been there 4 times, but I've never actually spent the night there. So yeah.
Okay. I've got some other questions here, which kind of relates to NomadMania. Where I get into that is, I saw on your profile on there that you've got one last UN plus area to go to. What is that area?
That is Tokelau, which is in the middle of the Pacific again. Tokelau is north of Samoa, and it is a territory of New Zealand. So it's administered by New Zealand, but it is autonomous. And obviously, this is a Polynesian nation. There are 3 islands, all of them very small. I think the total population of all 3 islands is about 2,000 people. So it's very, very small. It's difficult to get to, very hard. And they've got stringent visa requirements, which became even stricter due to COVID. And I don't even know what, and then there's a boat which sometimes goes, but it's very unreliable. It's one of the holy grails for a lot of the people. It's one of the trickier places.
Okay. What do you think is the trickiest place that you have traveled to?
Ooh. Well, there's a number of them. Again, it depends on how you define a place. If we're looking at NomadMania regions, I think there's a couple of regions which are technically in the Arctic mega region. They are islands north of Russia. They are part of Russia. So like Franz Josef Land. But even further on, you've got Novaya Zemlya and Severnaya Zemlya. These are islands, essentially, that go all the way, north, very cold. You need to be on an expedition ship to visit them. I suppose now, because of the political situation, that's probably not doable. But I was lucky enough to be on a ship doing those in 2016, and that's quite a voyage. I mean, it's fascinating. We saw polar bears. It's very cold, and we went in July, so we never saw night for a whole month. It was just daytime. So I would say those regions are really very difficult to get to.
Okay. And have you been to Tristan da Cunha? Just a little interest of mine.
I have, yes.
Is that difficult, or is that relatively easy?
Well, I wouldn't call it easy. The problem with Tristan da Cunha is that there's always a chance you're not going to land because of bad weather.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a gamble, because, again, you depend on the ship. There is the official ship that goes in from Cape Town a few times a year, and I guess that one will definitely get you there. But if you do go on that, then you might have to spend a number of weeks on Tristan da Cunha, which is probably a bit too much for anybody's liking. So if you're going to go, again, if you're going to book a trip on an expedition to go there, if the weather gods are not on your side, then you may end up not landing. So that makes it difficult because of that. But I wouldn't call it impossible, though.
Okay. Is that technically the most most inhabited
Uh,
island?
yeah, I think so. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Tristan da
Okay.
Cunha is the most remote inhabited place in the world. Yeah.
It's on my list. Another list. Okay. Yeah, an interesting question. Any? Oh, it's quite broad because you've been so many places. I've got like, is there any areas or regions that you just didn't like or you'd never go back to? I'm not talking about like difficulty of getting there. I mean, just like the experience or the vibe or.
You know what? I'm going to say no, and that's not because I like everywhere equally. Far
Mm.
from it. But I think, first of all, you never know if your opinions were the result of your own shortcomings. And
Ah.
maybe, I mean,
Mm.
I'm human, and that means that sometimes I'm just not in the mood, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
And then, if I'm traveling and I'm just, not in a very good mood, obviously everything will be annoying,
Yeah.
no matter what. So there are some places where I feel, yeah, I don't like them. But then I'm like, was I maybe the one to make it negative rather
Ah.
than it being objectively so? Obviously, places like war zones and stuff are not nice to be in,
Mm.
or or even after the war, if you've got devastation and people who are hungry or really poor. I mean, this is never pleasant. But at the same time, I think you can always make a difference in those cases, which
Mm.
means that your trip is worthwhile. So I would say 100% no, there's nowhere I wouldn't go again. Given the opportunity, there are some places I wouldn't go to now for political reasons. I just, don't think it's correct. It sends the wrong message to go to certain places at this historical time, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't go at another better time.
Yeah, I get you. That's quite an interesting topic, that, isn't it? I think those sort of personal morals about going to certain countries because of the political
Mm.
situation, because some people just park the side and just go anyway because they feel like that's not really a thing. But then I guess some people also COVID was a thing as well, where should you go, but people still traveled, right?
Yes.
It's an interesting debate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the morality of it is always difficult. And I think at the end of the day, I don't believe in a blanket morality.
Mm.
People should decide for themselves, more or less, what is right and what isn't. Yeah, I mean, inevitably others will sometimes criticize, but yeah, I think if you're going to travel, you should feel okay with yourself doing it. That's
Agreed.
important.
Okay, I've got a random question here. Have you met any presidents, royalty, or heads of state on your travels?
Well, I when we were traveling in Nigeria, we bumped into someone who claimed that he was the king of Owo, and Owo is this area in Nigeria, and he actually did give us the guided tour of the presidential palace, which is not a palace in the way that we might
Yeah.
understand Buckingham Palace. It is building, but he did show us the picture of his grandfather with the Queen, who
Oh,
had visited
okay.
Nigeria in 1956. So that is when I thought, okay, his credentials are real. So I would say he really was the king, and he was very friendly. He was just an ordinary guy. We just happened to be there and stopped to see the structure, and he was like, "Oh, foreigners, come along in." So that was. I think he's the only one I can really say I've met, as far as I remember.
Okay, it's funny. I can imagine you asking for ID. I need some ID here. Like, are you really like the the king? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I accidentally bumped into the president of Vanuatu when I went to check in with my girlfriend at the hotel.
Ah,
Um,
wonderful.
because he
How was
was
that?
well, it's the strangest occurrence. Like we just turned up into the airport with this like fanfare that didn't really twig really. This group got off. I just didn't twig that could be someone important, and then we got our taxis to the hotel, and we're checking in. I'm a bit of a backpacker, so like small backpack in shorts, probably not washed for a day or something, right? And then suddenly all these dancers start appearing from nowhere. Like, let's get the champagne out. There's dancers. The management was sort of standing in a semicircle, and then suddenly this entourage turns up. So the person who's checking us in, like, who's this? It's like, oh, that's the president. It's like, oh God. So he came in with his police chief, army chief, navy chief, his family. There's this like dance going on, and the scene. If you're a fly on the wall and you're sort of filming the scene, you would see his entourage looking forward with the dancers and the champagne flowing and that. And to the left, there's a couple of random backpackers checking in. It's the strangest situation. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then next morning, I sort of said, "Hello, how you doing, Mr. President?" And he said, "Yeah, not too bad. Like, how's your stay?" So I had a little chat with him. Yeah.
Side story, I don't know if you know that Vanuatu has been taken off the Schengen list of countries. Like they now need a visa for Schengen because apparently
Ah.
they have this program for second citizenship, and possibly some dodgy people got a Vanuatu passport, and the EU
Ah.
decided Vanuatu is no longer eligible for visa-free travel. This is just a total side note that
Great
not
note.
many
Yeah.
people may know about.
No, no.
Yeah.
Ah, very interesting. Okay. I've got here any emergency evacuations that you've had to do or leave quickly.
No, no, knock on wood. I'm really healthy. I've never had any major issues. I've never been in the middle of a coup or a
Mm.
government change or any earthquake or anything. No, not so far.
Okay. And any near-death experiences, like maybe like on an experience or a travel experience or
No, no, no air crashes. No, no, it's boring, boring. I can only say I've been to prison. That's it.
Oh, okay.
Nothing else. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. And these are just like sort of random questions, really. Ever been sort of mugged or robbed of your stuff? Maybe lost a passport?
Yes, I did lose my passport once. I think I know how. You know how I put my mobile phone and my passport in my pocket together, and then I think I was taking my phone out to take a photograph of something,
Mm.
and I think my passport just fell, and I didn't notice it. But I was all right because I had my ID, and this was in Italy, so I could
Oh,
get
okay.
around with the ID instead, and then I just applied for a new passport eventually. So that wasn't as disastrous. Once I thought I had lost my passport in Ethiopia, and I really panicked.
Mm.
But then I found it the next morning. It had fallen under the bath mat in the bathroom. So as I was changing to go have a shower, somehow the passport fell out of the pocket and managed to hide itself under the bath mat. Yeah, that was scary though. You do not want to lose a passport in an African country. But yeah.
Yeah, imagine there's certain countries that you could probably get away with it, but some countries not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you travel in terms of luggage? Are you a light traveler? Are you a bit of a suitcase person? A rucksack? Like any specifics there?
Super light backpack. I'll only take a suitcase if it's a long trip on a ship,
Mm.
like a month long, and then you really don't have much of a choice. But otherwise, even if I'm traveling for a month or so, it's going to be just with the backpack. And I
Okay.
will recycle the clothes. I barely carry anything. I have my laptop. I do still have a camera,
Yeah.
and that is like the second little tiny camera case, and that's it. Yeah, very simple.
Okay. And how do you journal your travels? Are you a writer? Are you maybe dictaphone? Anything like that?
No, I don't journal them anymore.
No.
And I'm not much of a social media user either.
Hmm.
So it's just all in my head. What I do have, I have an Excel sheet with all my flights, because the inner geek has to be alive. And of course, I do, and I do register my every trip on NomadMania, so
Yes.
region by
Yeah.
region. And I do sometimes use NomadMania to remember when I was at a particular place,
Hmm.
because I've got them all there per year. But that's it. Otherwise, no.
Okay. And before we get to Nomad Mania, my question here, if it's three areas or regions tomorrow, so no questions asked, you can go on expeditions or there's a special trip going somewhere, where would you go? What top three would you go to? Maybe these could be ones you've been to before or even new ones you've not been to.
Oh, oof, what a question. Okay, I would go tomorrow. And again, this is based a lot on my mood currently being
Yeah.
in Korea, which means I'm a little bit tired of the local cuisine. So I would go to Turkey because I love the food and I really miss, some of the nice meat there and some of the nice desserts. So that would be one. I would go to Ethiopia which is always a favorite because it's so culturally diverse, welcoming. It's also geographically very diverse.
Mhm.
And in order to give some variety, well, I would go to the USA because I need to go there before the next election because who knows what's going to happen there. So I might as well go tomorrow.
Fair
Um,
enough. We're going to go to NomadMania. We mentioned it quite a lot in this episode. I'd like you to tell people what is the idea of the site, how do people join, and how does it enhance people's travels and, yeah, even your travels maybe.
Okay, well, NomadMania has been around for a while, and obviously its purpose has evolved over the years. The basic initial concept was that countries are not enough. Countries deserve more than just being ticked.
Yeah.
So we found a way to try to divide the world into regions in a way which gives every country its true worth based on both itself and other countries around it. So let's say a small country like Slovenia will have two regions. Korea, where I am now, South Korea has six regions. And that means that, you can discover every region. So what happens on NomadMania, we don't look at countries, we look at regions. Obviously, in some things they are grouped by country, but every region has its page. And the idea is, in a way, to educate. If you go to the regional page of, say, Northeast Korea region, you will see its map, and then there's a whole list of things you can see and do. We curate that. We have that in categories. So we've got a thing we call series. There are about 70 series, things like caves, aquariums, bizarrium. We've got things like aviation museums, lists and stuff. So depending on what you like, you can find it there. And that is the main concept, is for people to both document their travels in a way, in the form of a diary, maybe, if they do it correctly, to then also see how far they've gone visually, because we've got maps where these are represented, and to be educated by learning more about each of these under-visited places. We are a non-profit, and we provide travel scholarships for people who have never traveled outside their country. We have helped, let's say, we recently gave a couple of scholarships to two students from Rwanda who went to Tanzania. They had their first flight. They went to Tanzania. And for us, we're like, Rwanda, Tanzania, they're quite similar. But no, these girls went to Tanzania. They're like, it's so hot here. We never experienced such heat. Or something as simple as like they had never seen the ocean before. So these are extremely, you would never think of that. But these things really make a difference. So we really believe in trying to make travel a bit more democratic. We also do organize our own trips. We're not an agency and we don't make money, but what we do is we find local helpers in sort of difficult or challenging places. And what we do is bring the group together. We advertise and our members might join. And then we have the local expert who runs this. So, we did go to Ukraine in October, and we had a very meaningful trip there. And the locals were really welcoming there. They really appreciated us being there. And we also do our annual travel awards, where we have nominees who are maybe not even part of NomadMania. So we look at the whole travel world, and we nominate, like our members nominate people, and we give different awards in categories. So we are also for fun in a way. So it's a bit of fun, a bit of education, and it is a community. Through NomadMania, a lot of people have met, and then they continue traveling together and meeting each other. So there's a lot of that social aspect as well.
And do you hold many events throughout the year where people can maybe join you?
We do, and there's going to be more as of next year. So I would say we have maybe 4 to 5 trips a year in very diverse places. Some are very easy. So we're having a long weekend on the Åland Islands, if you've heard of them. That's an archipelago of Finland.
Right.
So it's not it's not difficult,
Yeah.
it's a nice long weekend. And then of course some trips are difficult. And we do meetings, the regional meetings for our local communities as well.
Mhm.
And then we occasionally have a conference. And the awards themselves are a social event.
Okay, that's awesome. What I love about the site is, because I'm quite new to it, so I'm still like investigating it a little bit, is the different type of lists. Like you got one on there for UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I mean, I can't remember
Yes.
the total number there is. I think you've been to obviously quite a few of them, but I was like, oh wow, there's that many in the world. So I'm now thinking, how
Yeah,
many have I
there
been
are.
to? That's quite awesome. Yeah.
There are. There's 1,199 at the moment. I have to admit, not all of them are visit worthy.
Yeah.
UNESCO has its own criteria, and a lot of the sites are there because of their value to humanity. But when you go there, maybe not so much is left to see.
Mm.
You can understand the impact, but there's a mound and you look at the mound, and yeah, okay, someone very important might have been buried there. And at
Yeah.
the time, I suppose this was, but as a visitor, yeah, a mound is a mound. I'm not sure how much you can get out of it. But then, of course, some other site, I'm just saying that because I went to a couple of mounds here in Korea, and I'm like, yeah, very beautiful mound indeed. But then some others are obviously very significant and very popular and very known. So yeah, some people in the community are counting how many they've been to as well. So we offer that.
And how do you verify travelers who might say they've been somewhere who could be lying or not
Yeah.
telling the full truth?
Yeah, we are the only website of its kind that does actually attempt this. It's quite sad that some people do not portray their trips accurately. I
Mm.
always wondered why. I do think sometimes it's inadvertently, to be fair. People might think that a region is not, they thought they'd visited it and they got muddled with a name or something. Fair enough. But then we have had some examples of blatant cheating. What we do is we ask for a representative sample. We have two levels of verification. So one is for the countries. And if
Yeah.
it's countries, we're going to ask for 20 random, but they're not entirely random countries. So, we are going to ask for a few that we know are harder, and then the person has to prove they've been there. And we will accept a variety of proof. Obviously, passport stamps are preferred, but there's a lot of other things that we have used as proof, including something as obscure as a diary. But
Okay. Yeah.
no, and then for the regions, we're going to ask for 60, which is harder. Regions are harder to prove, especially in countries where, like, I don't know, in European countries, if you're asked to prove that you've been to, say, I don't know, Molise, which is one of the areas of Italy, it might sometimes be difficult because you can't find any evidence of it
Yeah.
itself if you drove there. But somehow we've managed, and we have verified, I think it's almost 300 people. We do not require this of everyone, let me be clear. We generally verify only those who have a higher ranking on NomadMania,
Got
which
it.
means they are more visible and they are claiming to really be big travelers. So yeah.
Yeah. I think the best thing about it is you just track your own travels. You can see just what you've done, right?
Yeah.
Because it is
Yeah.
hard to sometimes remember if you don't track from, I don't know, 20 years ago. And I've been some places I don't even remember. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite good,
Yeah.
that
Well,
one.
if you've traveled a lot, it does take a while to actually write, fill it all out. And there's different ways to do it. I use the one where I'm actually creating trips and filling in the dates and each region I was in. But that's the one that works for me because then I can really look back and think, okay, so that's what I did in June of 2012.
Yeah.
How else would I remember? So.
That's why I podcasted on the road this year, just so I know each week where I was and what we got up to, because you do
Yeah,
forget
right.
the little niche
Yeah.
parts of
Oh,
travel, right? Who you met that day, or I met a guy called Choi in South Korea on the tube. He just come up to us and start speaking basically some shit, really, but it's quite funny. But yeah, he was just an interesting character on the tube. I'll probably forget that next year. So yeah, just need
right.
to note down
Yeah.
those sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you.
Okay, and you're going to the Extraordinary Travel Festival next year?
I'm planning to, yes. Rick, who is organizing it, asked me to be a speaker,
Mm,
and I have accepted the invitation. So, fingers crossed, I should be there next November. Will you be there?
I will. Yes, indeed.
Ah, okay. Well,
Yeah,
then we'll definitely meet up there then.
it'd be great. It's kind of one of our first events, I think, travel events, I'd say. Yeah, there's a few podcast events, but yeah, I'm really intrigued because I love Thailand as well. So going back to Bangkok would be a nice little experience and meeting some, yeah, like-minded people. It's quite unique.
I think you're going to love it. I was not at the event in Armenia last year, although I did lead a trip just before the event in Armenia.
Mm,
But the feedback was great. It's really it's on the one hand an interesting event because you've got very interesting speakers, very diverse topics. So
yeah.
it touches upon a broad range of travel themes. And of course, it is a very good opportunity to meet like-minded people. So I think, it's guaranteed to be a worthwhile time.
Yeah, it's interesting because my close group of friends in Norwich are probably not that sort of like-minded person, right? Which is not it's not a
Yeah,
criticism, it's just the way things have gone, right? I do think certain people, when you get to a certain amount of countries, you must be very intrigued with travel. You must like it a lot. Um, and that means you need to find people who can probably relate a bit more to it rather than the people who don't go to as many places, maybe.
yeah. Well, what I find with myself is that I'm almost two people now. I've got the
Yes.
traveler
Yeah.
Harry and the non-traveler Harry. And then when
Yeah.
I'm with my old friends, the ones from Greece, for example, or the ones from Oxford for that matter, and they're not really travelers, we're going to talk about other things. I mean, we
Yeah.
may briefly mention travel, but it's not going to be a major theme. But then with the travelers, it's almost always exclusively about travel and, things like that.
It's because when you come back home to real life, if you like, you don't get asked any questions about it. So I've been,
No,
yeah, I left my job in January, but I kind of started in December, really. So it's been a year. I don't think I'll get many questions about it, which is nice in a way, but also a bit like, they're not really that interested in it, which is fine. But I think you would like to kind of
yeah.
share experiences with people like yourself.
Yeah, but you've got the podcast, and I'm sure that gives you some exposure. And in my
Yeah.
case, by being the founder of NomadMania, people kind of know my name here and there. So inevitably, I always get emailed, and there's questions here and there. And then I'm working on NomadMania as well with the team. So I definitely get more than enough travel related aspects to my life that I think that there are times when I wish I had more of the non-travel related. I'm perfectly happy with sitting and watching a film and not worrying about travel at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can people find you on? I know you're not social media that much, but maybe websites or how they can contact you.
I am on Instagram. My handle is Harry Nomad. So just add me there. I tend to only add people who I can tell are travelers or I know somehow. We have common friends. I'm not going
Yeah.
to add anyone. My profile is not public, so you've got
Okay.
to.
Yeah.
And that is partially because I'm not really, I'm not doing any of this for myself. Really, it's more as part of Nomad Mania and being, pushing Nomad Mania forward. Otherwise people can always send me an email, harry@nomadmania.com. I do answer every email I get. Maybe not immediately if I'm traveling, but eventually. And yeah, if not, just meet me in one of the many meetups we have, either of Nomad Mania or elsewhere. And by all means, if you're listening, remember Nomad Mania is totally free. So you have nothing to lose by joining us. You just have lots of interesting content to gain.
Awesome. Okay. And one last question before we get to my little feature to finish the episode on is what's next for you? I know you're in South Korea right now. What's coming up travel wise?
Well, what's coming up is my mum's 80th birthday party. So it is a return to the familiar Athenian atmosphere where I grew up, where I'm going to be seeing lots of friends. So no real travel content there. One of the plans for early next year is that long trip to the US. I think it's time. It's a good time to go to the US now. And I've always wanted to have a long road trip there. I've never
Oh,
done that. I've had short road trips, but never this 2 month long road trip that takes in everything I wanted.
yeah, we just done that
Um,
this year. Yeah, in the summer. It was great in a camper
lucky
van.
man. Right,
Yeah.
perfect. Sounds good. Sounds good. So this is more or less what I'm planning on. NomadMania is having a trip to Algeria in April, and I'm going to be on that as well. And we'll see. I don't like to plan too far in advance. My participation on ETF had to be planned, but that is quite rare. So I have
Mm.
no idea really what I'm going to be doing until next November when that comes up.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to finish the episode with some quick fire travel questions. These are normally your favorite things worldwide that you've seen, so you've got a lot of choice to choose from. I kind of make them up as I go. So I normally do kick off with how many countries you travel to, but you've answered that one already. So let's go with
It's travel question time.
your top 3 favorite UN countries that you travel to.
I really don't like this question.
I know.
It's so unfair to the other countries. I always, whenever I'm asked it, the answer always differs. So it's never the same answer. Um, uh, just now, I'm going to come up with Namibia, Colombia, and I'm going to say Tuvalu. Why not?
Okay.
Random three. Yeah.
Okay. And which 3 countries has the best cuisine?
Oh, okay. Turkey, 100% Turkey. Uh, I was just in Japan and man, I really enjoyed it.
Mhm.
So I'll put Japan on the list. Um, and I'm going to say Argentina because they definitely do the best meat, and I'm a meat person. So those three.
Okay. Can you give me 3 cities in the world to sit and drink coffee and watch the world go by for an afternoon? Where are you going to sit?
What's your definition of city?
Oh no. Uh, okay, city or town. No, city or town. Yeah.
City or town.
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, you're going to get really weird answers from me. So I'm going to say Szeged. That is a town in southern Hungary. Very pretty, not much visited, definitely worth going to. Then I am going to say, so coffee in a random city. I'm going to say Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda. It has made an incredible turnaround since the Civil War and is probably one of the nicest countries in Africa. If someone hasn't been to Africa, Rwanda is a very good country to start from. Poltava in Ukraine, uh, because Ukraine is a place I just really love in many ways. And Poltava is a very historical town. It is the locus of a famous battle between the Swedish and Russian armies in 1700 something, I think. Um, and yeah, having a coffee in Ukraine definitely means a lot of pleasant people watching. I will put it diplomatically.
Okay. And what about 3 favorite beaches?
Beaches. Oh, come on. I'm half Greek. I mean, they're all gonna be in Greece.
That's fine.
So okay. Well, we've got in Greece there's an island off the coast of the Peloponnese called Elafonisos. Any
Okay.
beach on that island is amazing. It's like
Yeah.
the ultimate paradise. Short ferry ride off the town of Neapoli on the southeastern coast of the Peloponnese. Then you've got the famous Navagio beach. Everyone knows that one. It's the kind of postcard on Zante
Hmm.
beach. That is a must. Uh, I haven't been for many years, but there are Kukunaries Beach in Skiathos, I think, is one I remember very fondly from my earlier years, and I imagine it still is very beautiful.
Okay. I've got a question from social media. It says, how many countries or regions do I need to get to do an interview and be posted on NomadMania Instagram?
You can become a member of NomadMania without, I mean, technically you can become a member without filling in your profile. To appear on the rankings, because we have that, you need to have, I think, 40 regions. That's not country related. So in theory, let's say, especially if you're American and you've traveled a lot in America, you can get 40 regions just by without ever having been abroad. I think we have that because otherwise it'd be, not so meaningful to have those sort of rankings of travelers. Yeah.
Okay. What about 3 favorite airlines?
Air New Zealand, Emirates. It's going to have to be Emirates. And I'm going to try to think of a niche one, just because I like being a bit quirky. Let me think. Luxair. They give a really good sandwich on board.
Okay. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, if you're going to fly Luxair, ask for the beef sandwich because they offer beef and cheese, and most people will say cheese. Believe me, the beef one is good. So
Wow.
that's a little. Well, I wanted to say something a bit different. So
yeah, I like it. I like
yeah.
it. I like it. Okay. If tomorrow you can only go and stay in one country or one place for a year and live there, where are you going to plot yourself?
For a year. Okay. That one is interesting. Now, it would have to be a country that's big enough for me to roam around. It'd have to be a country that has diversity in climate because I don't like a monotone, and ideally diversity in geography as well. If I'm staying in a year, it means I'd like a place which is relatively well organized, not truly chaotic. I think the only country I can think of that fits the bill is Chile,
Oh yeah,
because
nice.
from north to south you've got
Yes.
dramatically different climate, and it's, I would say, relatively well organized. It's by far, I think, the most advanced in Latin America. It still has a nice, pleasant Latin vibe, but sort of a cut above the rest in terms of organization. Lots to see and do, lots of natural sites, especially in the south, and lots of interesting cultural sites as well. So I'm sure my year would be quite good in Chile.
Love it. Okay. And 3 countries that are probably good for the budget. So if you're a bit of a maybe got not too much to spend on travel, but if you can name 3 countries that will take your dollar or pound the furthest, where you're going to say?
Moldova, absolutely, really budget friendly. Again, I would say quite a quirky country, lots to experience in Moldova. If you do go to Moldova, stay at least a week and do go around. I think most travelers go for 3 days. That's not enough. Laos, again, landlocked and eclipsed by Thailand, but really, really nice. Luang Prabang is one of my favorite places in the
Same.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah, a true gem. And again, I think it's particularly friendly on the budget. Let me think of a third one, which is good. You know what? I'm going to say Korea. It's not that cheap, but to be honest, it's been surprisingly affordable. And given that Korea is, I would say, one of the really developed countries in the world, it's up there. You get, good things for very reasonably priced. The food is reasonably priced. Even petrol is not as expensive as it is in Europe, say. So yeah, it's not such a bad deal.
I'd agree with that because I think we got a coffee. I can't remember if it's Busan or Seoul, and they claim to be like the barista of the year last year. It's like $2. I'm like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
That's great value.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, on the street, like brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. Korea is surprisingly affordable. It's not It is cheaper than Japan, clearly. It's not quite as efficient as Japan.
Mm.
Inevitably, you end up comparing the two because they are neighbors. And sometimes I hate myself for doing that because it's unfair. But I think, in its own right, Korea is a good value country and it somehow doesn't get the visitors that it should.
Yeah.
So maybe we should push a bit more for poor South Korea. Yeah.
Okay. I got a couple more questions. I'm giving you a camper van tomorrow. So you've got 3 countries to do a road trip. Where are you going to road trip? A bit loose here. You go into one place, you fly and you do your road trip, and you fly to another place, do a road trip. Not consecutively.
All right. I'm gonna pretend this is fictional because I know that I wouldn't drive everywhere comfortably. I do love to drive, but there are some places where I'd hesitate. But I'm going to say Mexico because I don't know it as well as I'd like to. And I think that's one country where you need wheels to really explore it well. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So that's one. Again, if this were fictional, I'm going to say Iran, because it's huge. And again, to cover all these distances, a car would be the most convenient way. Also, because petrol is so cheap there, it's almost cheaper than water. So it wouldn't cost me very much to drive around Iran. And it is one of the most intriguing countries with a good road network as well, decent infrastructure. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch. And then a third one, I'm going to say South Africa. My mum was born there. I don't know it as well as I'd like to. And I think a camper van may be the right way to explore it.
Okay. What's the most high adrenaline activity you've done on your travels?
Go to Mogadishu.
Wow.
Believe me, it was a constant adrenaline high. I did not sleep while I was there. I was just so anxious. It was just all my senses were heightened at every moment. So that's it.
Okay. And last question is going to be, what words or few sentences can you give to someone who is looking to travel, who's maybe a bit nervous or needs a bit of a pick me up to go and sort of go and test themselves in a different culture? What would you say?
Well, first of all, I'd say don't believe what you read. If you read the advice of, say, the Foreign Office, you'd probably never leave your front door. So, the world is not as terrifying as it is portrayed. In general, I have found that people are kind and helpful almost everywhere. I'd also say that even though things work very differently in different places, ultimately it's important to remember that most people want the same things. So the minute you're able to humanize all these other people who are very similar to you with the same types of problems, usually not enough money, often a spouse that, nags them and doesn't let them do what they want. People, like, once you humanize them, then I think the difficulties of being in a different place will evaporate, and then you will feel more at home no matter where you are.
Awesome. Okay, Harry, thanks for coming onto the podcast. It's actually been an honor. You were actually on my list for a while, so I'm glad to get this in late 2023, going into 2024, and I look forward to seeing you next year at Extraordinary Travel Festival.
That would be wonderful. I really look forward to that. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to my Winging It Travel podcast episode today. You can find me on Instagram at James Hammond Travel or Winging It Travel Podcast. You can search for both. I release weekly clips of this podcast episode, as well as photos from the last 8 to 10 years of my travels. You can also follow me on TikTok, Facebook and Pinterest by searching Winging It Travel Podcast. I do release daily content to do with travel and the podcast throughout the week. Also check out my website, jameshammond.org. There's content about myself, my travels, and there's also a newsletter sign up as well as a contact form. Finally, please rate and review the podcast on Podchaser. This is my platform of choice. Alternatively, you can rate this on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. This really helps the podcast gain a bit of traction for the future in terms of guests and content. And I'm glad to see that you guys are listening out there, reviewing it and enjoying the content so far. Stay safe, stay humble, keep listening, keep travelling, and I'll catch you soon. Cheers, James.